I'm Michelle.
And I'm Lucy.
Welcome to another Cameo episode. These episodes of various lengths, we changed it, about people we may or may not have mentioned before, will be slotted in between other episodes and may or may not fill in the gaps and enhance our understanding of the age. Well, I'm hoping it'll help our understanding of the age.
That'd be something, wouldn't it?
Yes, but this is a more representative blurb.
Yeah. And today, Cardinal Christopher Bainbridge.
Don't think I've ever heard of him.
We mentioned him in Silvestro Jiggly's episode, definitely.
I love how you're calling him Jiggly now.
He's just Jiggly. It's an affectionate term.
The little jello guy.
Bainbridge's secretary, Richard Pace, wrote to Thomas Wolsey, and we'll be hearing a fair amount about Thomas Wolsey, quote, "It is necessary for the King's grace to have one or two, if need were, cardinals and residents in the court of Rome, both for knowledge of all things that shall succeed here, and also for the creation of popes," unquote. Which was very sensible. There are ambassadors at the papal court, but they're observers.
Right.
To have an English cardinal meant someone who was actually part of the court.
And got to make suggestions, be heard.
Yeah, and he did. Morton was a cardinal, but we don't hear of him ever going to Rome, do we? He's a sort of absentee cardinal. But Bainbridge was definitely our man in Rome.
Okay.
There were many ways in which having a pet cardinal could be very useful to the monarch.
A pet cardinal. Now he's a bird.
He could protect and inform the ambassador. So if the ambassador fell foul of the Pope, he could go in and say, cut him some slack, he's all right.
Yeah, be nice.
And he could also slip the ambassador some information from the papal court. If he got close to the Pope, which is unlikely unless he's his nephew, but if he did, he could actually influence policy. And the monarch would be hoping that if he'd influence in the favour of his home country, which Bainbridge really did.
Oh, really? Even though they were going against the Pope with the alum trade. That is gutsy.
I don't know how much Bainbridge knew about the alum trade. He had quite a lot of other things on his plate. And they could push for the monarch's choice of bishop as well, which was quite handy.
Oh, okay. I thought the monarchs just chose the bishops. And that was it.
Yeah, but it had to be ratified by the Pope, I think, didn't it?
Right.
So I presume the Pope wouldn't know everybody, and they'd call in the person from that country and say, "What do you know of this one?" And he could say, "Oh, no, he's lovely.
Right.
And he's a saint. Choose him." Actually, being English was much safer for the king than fostering the goodwill of foreign clergy in England. Because Castellesi, despite being Bishop of Hereford and Bishop of Bath of Wells, failed to support a bull condemning James IV of Scotland. As Bainbridge said, quote, "Some occasion he should have had to have spoken by reason of his livelihood within your realm," unquote.
Yes, but he's a foreign ecclesiastic.
Yeah.
That's always surprised me, how you could take a foreigner and put them in a position of power in a country.
They all did, yeah. But they did it.
They did, yeah.
He had been showered with benefices, and then he'd bitten the hand that fed him. At least, that's what Bainbridge said. And the papal court comes across as an incredibly bitchy place. It really does.
Bleep.
Also, Castellesi was under the patronage of Venice, Maximilian and Margaret of Austria, as well as Henry, so they're hardly likely to put themselves out if their loyalties are spread that thinly.
Yes, true.
You just couldn't trust people like that, was Bainbridge's point of view.
Yeah.
Although that didn't stop him later doing it. When Castellesi fell from grace, he was replaced as English protector by one of Julius's nephews. Surprise, surprise.
Oh, dear.
And after that, it was Cardinal Alidossi, who we heard about. He was the man who Julius put in charge of Bologna, who then became a tyrant and was stabbed to death by one of Julius's nephews. That was all going on in Rome.
Oh, dear.
But he didn't have much to do with England. In fact, I don't think he'd ever set foot in it, but he was still meant to be English protector. So Bainbridge was very keen that an Englishman would be more trustworthy if he wanted someone to push for England's rights.
Yeah.
Someone like me, he was saying.
Okay, I get it. I'm a little slow on the uptake, but I got it.
England was not well represented in the Curia. Of 162 men who were cardinals between 1480 and 1534, only 3 were English, compared to 6 from the Borgia family and 7 from the Della Rovere family. So, yeah, twice as many from one family than this whole country. But I suppose it becomes self-perpetuating. If you've got a system where preferment is given by the person who's already there, I mean, who are they going to choose? Some obscure person from an obscure island or their own nephew? Mind you, Cardinal Piccolomini was made Protector of England, which he apparently took very seriously, despite I don't think he ever went there, but he did take the role seriously. And it should have opened all sorts of doors for Henry when Piccolomini became Pope Pius III in 1503.
I like Piccolomini. He should have kept the name.
So, what a pity he died just 3 weeks later.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Pick him younger. No.
Well, they deliberately picked him old because they needed a bit of breathing space.
Yes, they needed a stopgap. A placeholder. Yeah. Didn't they call them placeholders?
Yes, but he was less time than they anticipated. I mean, they expected more than 3 weeks.
Yes.
Early in 1509, Julius requested an English orator to discuss what to do with the Turkish problem. Now, I'm not sure why he particularly needed an English orator. The only thing I could think of was that he might have been none too pleased at how Henry VII was siding with the Venetians, and he wanted to hammer it into him what was at stake.
Ah.
But anyway, Bainbridge was the one they went for, which probably backfired because he was very pro-Venice. Right, bit on his life. Christopher Bainbridge was born in 1462 in Westmoreland. His parents weren't very well off, but he did have an influential uncle, Thomas Langton, who was a prelate and diplomatist, and he took him under his wing. He'd opened his own school, and he'd become Bishop of St David's in Wales, and that's where, do you remember the bishops were all made out of purple stone?
Oh, right.
Through my bad grammar.
Yes.
And he became Bishop of Salisbury, so a useful uncle to have.
I think it's ridiculous that they could hold more than one bishopric. You have
crazy.
A lot of work to do.
Apparently not.
You're not
Apparently
doing
not.
it.
No. Well, we'll find out, because Bainbridge becomes Bishop of York, and yes, then people say of him that he wasn't doing as much as he ought to, perhaps. Bainbridge studied in Oxford, Ferrara and Bologna, and had degrees in civil and canon law. He then moved to Rome, where he became Chamberlain of the English Hospice. And that was where Giovanni Gigli was buried wearing someone else's gloves, if you remember. Yeah. Bainbridge, while he was in Rome, he rented the place next door to Juan Borgia.
Oh, good neighbour.
Did he do it? Was Juan a particularly noisy neighbour?
Yes.
He said, right, that's it, into the Tiber with you.
All those husbands coming around, thumping on the door, saying, give me back my wife.
Yes. This useful uncle was very much in with Margaret Beaufort, and through her, Bainbridge was able to get some benefices, including the post of Treasurer of St Paul's. He was also on Henry VII's council, which might have been to do with Margaret, or possibly to do with his degrees in canon and civil law. He was also Master of the Rolls, a post previously held by John Morton, and he became Dean of York, Dean of St George's Chapel, Windsor, and the Bishop of Durham, and the Archbishop of York.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Stop.
Also chosen to assist Margaret Beaufort as High Commissioner in the North, which makes me wonder, why have I only ever heard this man in relation to the papal court in Rome?
I know, because he didn't do anything of significance in any of those roles.
Well, we will find out he might not have done anything in some of them at all. As we come to expect, he could hardly do a conscientious job in all these posts. He was accused by Wolsey that there were what were called dilapidations in York after Bainbridge's archbishopric. I'm not sure whether he meant what he meant by dilapidations. Not spending enough on the fabric of the buildings, not employing enough prophets, I'm not sure.
Could be anything.
But Wolsey was convinced enough to relieve Bainbridge's estate of the money to cover the shortfall after Bainbridge's death. But by the time he was supposedly Archbishop of York, Bainbridge was spending much of his time in Rome, so he probably wasn't looking after the diocese.
Nope.
He was at the court at the death of King Henry VII. I don't think he was one of the people around the deathbed, but I haven't been able to find out who all of them were.
No, some of them are just not named.
No. Really, much of the information we have about Bainbridge's life in Rome comes from Henry VIII's reign, but it sort of seemed more logical to do it after doing Pope Julius.
Mm-hmm.
Although he could have come after Pope Leo, but I've written it now, so this is when we're having it. Henry VIII gave him commission to undertake all negotiations in Rome, so a position of great trust. And we hear of Bainbridge initially in Rome from the Venetian ambassador. Julius had slapped an interdict on Venice, and the Venetians saw England as their only ally.
Right.
So the ambassador was trying to persuade Bainbridge to have a little word with Julius. In fact, as soon as Bainbridge's feet hit Roman soil, the Venetian ambassador was there, asking him to show the Pope some letters they'd received from Henry VIII.
He's walking down the gangplank.
Yes.
Hey! I need you for something.
Yeah, waving the letters in his face, yeah. Bainbridge, tactfully or cowardly, suggested that they showed the letters to the Pope themselves. The Pope was certainly to bring up the subject with him, and then he would put in a good word with him.
That way, if it doesn't come up, I don't have to say anything at all.
Yes, well, the ambassador wasn't very happy with this. He reckoned that Bainbridge was more concerned with getting the red hat than with diplomacy.
Yep.
Or if
Fair.
he didn't say that to Bainbridge, because he was concerned with diplomacy. And as the ambassador had suspected, Bainbridge was also instructed to get the red hat, which is odd, because I didn't think you could campaign for yourself, but
No.
just be really nice to the Pope and try and get the red hat.
Huh.
When Bainbridge did finally talk to the Pope on the subject of Venice, he said there was something to be said for both sides. Not quite what Venice had in mind, I don't think.
No.
But it did mean that Bainbridge hadn't burnt his bridge with the Pope even before he got his foot in the door, really. Because we've heard about Julius's rages. I mean, you don't want to be at the receiving end of them.
Yeah, very true.
But this does seem to be Bainbridge's tactic throughout. Don't rock the boat. Later, Julius called him back and said to him, "Now you've heard both sides of the argument, what do you think?" And Bainbridge said that what he thought was that it wasn't his business to pass judgment. And you think, well, what are you there for, Chris?
Exactly.
He said that whatever the Pope thought, he'd pass on to Henry as his own opinion.
What? That's not... That's
He
not
really
your
wants
job.
that red hat. He wants the red hat.
You... Ugh.
Yeah. Bainbridge then dropped the suggestion to Julius for a league including the Venetians, but against the French. Julius was not impressed with this idea, and point blank said no. And it seemed to me to be bad timing on Bainbridge's part. It's too early.
Yeah, he's just... Not impressed.
Yeah, how can Julius agree to something like that when he's still got an interdict on Venice? He can't join a league with them.
Nope.
Because he'd be tainting himself with the interdict.
Yes.
I mean, maybe Bainbridge could see into the future, because that's exactly what happens later on, but not just yet. And then Bainbridge wrote to Henry. It's a pity he's not a proper episode, because he'd be off the scale for intrigue, telling him of the league and passing it off as all Julius's idea.
Oh.
Henry replied, tentatively agreeing, saying, well, if Julius thinks so. So, a bit, dangerous, I would think.
Very.
Yeah, but Bainbridge seems to be so rabidly anti-French that he's willing to play Julius and Henry off against each other.
That's not a good thing to do.
No, I don't think so. He stressed to Venice he was still helping them, but suggested that maybe a little give and take might be an idea.
To him personally? He's asking for bribes?
No, to the Pope.
Oh, okay.
Maybe make a few concessions. Don't just dig your heels in, because you're not going to win. And we heard that the Venetians did make some concessions to the Pope, and that took place after this conversation, so it may have been Bainbridge that was the catalyst. This and a letter from Fox urging the Pope to lift the interdict meant that all was soon forgiven with the Venetians, so that's nice. And they could all get on with the serious business of bashing the French. And the Venetian ambassador was given instructions to thank Bainbridge warmly, so that's nice.
Yeah, so nice.
Maybe Bainbridge was a diplomatist, since he'd got what Venice wanted without antagonising Julius. So that's not bad going with Julius.
Yeah.
He's a bit of a prickly one. Bainbridge consistently supported anti-French policies, which he'd been told to do given that Henry VIII was itching to get over the Channel and start kicking some French derriere. But this was a running theme with Bainbridge. He was consistently anti-French even when circumstances had changed.
Oh. Why? Do we know why?
I don't know if there was anything in his past or...
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Whether he was sort of like a wind-up toy, he's sort of set on the path of anti-Frenchness and he just didn't veer from it.
You're like, okay, this is my direction.
This is what I do. In fact, just to show the French who was boss, he once sat in the French ambassador's seat in the papal chapel.
Ooh.
That was showing them.
Throwing down the gauntlet.
Yes, until Paris de Gracis, that's Julius's Burchett, told him not to and to go back to his own seat. Yeah, I was very disappointed when I heard Burchett was going, but Paris de Gracis is just, he's another Burchett.
Okay.
Yes, much the same mould. 1510, a news was filtering to Rome from England of a treaty with France, although Bainbridge strenuously denied it. But it doesn't seem that he was being disingenuous. There doesn't seem to be much communication from Henry's advisers, maybe deliberately. If Bainbridge knew, he could tell. If he didn't know, he couldn't. Maybe that's the thinking behind it. But the Venetian Cardinal Donato came to Bainbridge and suggested they'd go together to the Pope to hammer home the idea of the anti-French League before things went any further. But Bainbridge said he didn't want to go. The Pope wasn't in Rome. It's a long way, and the roads are bad.
I don't want to go.
No, leave me alone. He suggested another of the English staff, Christopher Fisher, but it does look suspiciously as if he's keeping a low profile until he himself knows what's going on. He wouldn't want to take a virulently anti-French stance only to find that was contrary to what Henry wanted.
Ah, so he's actually doing something fairly diplomatic there.
Well, he is walking a tightrope between two massive egos.
True.
As an Englishman, he should prioritise Henry.
Yes.
But as a churchman, his ultimate loyalty was to the Pope.
Yeah.
Tricky.
Yeah.
And if he's not being told what's going on,
how do you...
he's probably thinking, I don't know what to do.
I don't want to step in a landmine.
No. Anyway, Donato and Fisher set off to see the Pope. And Donato was soon back saying that the Pope had agreed to everything and that he was to seek Bainbridge's approval for a papal brief ordering Henry to break off the treaty with France.
Oh, dear.
But the Pope wanted it to be done secretly so that even his secretary shouldn't know.
Oh.
And Fisher was to take this letter to Henry along with the Golden Rose, which is a medal given to Pope's favourite ruler of that year.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and this would serve as a blind to hide Fisher's real commission.
Huh.
So, I'm not quite sure about the secrecy, unless they don't want the French to know what they're up to.
Yeah.
But he obviously didn't trust his own secretary.
Yeah. I mean, didn't he choose his secretary? I guess you can't really trust anyone whatsoever.
No. No, we found that time and time again in this podcast.
Yes.
You can't.
I would really hate that, though. I would hate not knowing. That, uncomfortable. I am not a diplomat, thankfully.
Yeah. When Bainbridge went to collect this brief from the Pope, this was one of the occasions we hear when he got stage fright. I found that rather endearing, that he dries up. It happens on several occasions.
Aww.
It didn't help that Paris de Gracis told him off afterwards because he did everything in the wrong order. He bowed before taking the gift instead of after. And then he started a speech of thanks and it just sort of fizzled out. And after a while the Pope said, well, fine, let's just leave it at that, shall we?
Oh, dear. Wow.
And maybe he didn't know what to say.
Thank you.
His anti-Frenchness would have meant he would want to pass on the Pope's message to Henry, but also he didn't want to be telling his monarch something the monarch didn't want to hear, because no envoy wants to do that. Fisher was safely on his way back to England when a message arrived saying that the Anglo-French treaty was a done deal and the Venetians were on their own.
Oh, he must have been so happy.
Christopher Bainbridge went hunting, seemingly to avoid having to talk to the Pope.
Oh.
And it was a pity he couldn't have stayed away longer, since when he was called before the Pope, Julius yelled at him and called him a liar.
I almost spit out my tea. Oops.
Bainbridge came away saying that he'd never met such a man. I mean, that's the Pope. I've never met such a man as him. But, this is not the way to get the red hat.
Nope. You are failing, sir, in all duties.
It was made all the worse because it was seen as a purely financial transaction. Everyone thought that Henry had been bought off. He was just leaving everyone else in the lurch.
He probably was. Quietly.
Holy League of 1510. Oh, we love the Holy League.
Yes,
It's almost as nice as the League of Cambrai, isn't it? Julius wanted to get the French out of Italy, and the altercation with Alfonso of Ferrara muscling in on the papal salt pans was kicking off.
Right.
Bainbridge saw the Ferrarese angle as being a means for England to break with the treaty with France, since Alfonso was going against papal power, and Louis of France was backing Alfonso. So surely England didn't want to be allied with someone who was going against the Pope. Bainbridge would carry on working, he assured the Pope, for an anti-French league. And secretly, he was sure that the Anglo-French Pact had been a clever ploy on Henry VIII's part to strengthen his bargaining power with the Holy League. That wouldn't have come from Henry, would it?
No. No, not at all. Totally wrong.
He could now ask for more concessions just for abandoning the French Pact than he could have done if he'd never made it.
Ah.
We'll find out next season how true that was. When the Pope went in person to take Ferrara, that time he discovered that Francesco Gonzaga, Lucretia Borgia's syphilitic lover, wasn't really putting in as much effort as he might do.
Well, he's got syphilis.
Yes, I know, but the Pope kept complaining. He always says he's ill. Well, yes, he is.
It's his own fault, but he is.
He's ill. Bainbridge went too. He was sent to discuss terms with the French commander, although to no effect. And on a jolly occasion, he attended the celebration at his old University of Bologna.
Oh, yay.
Yes. Yeah, I'm not sure at what point of the siege that was of Bologna, but
What are you doing?
Bainbridge was in a good position now. Things were going badly for Julius, and a mixture of Bainbridge being there and generally pulling his weight, and the fact that Julius more than ever wanted Henry VIII in the League, meant that Bainbridge's red hat was pretty much in the bag.
Oh, dear. When you say pretty much, I think he's not going to get it.
Well, in fact, rumours abounded that it was just a matter of time. But then Cardinal Carafa stuck his oar in and reminded the Pope that he'd promised not to make any more cardinals until their number fell to 24.
Oh.
Because cardinals don't like it if there's too many cardinals, because then their influence is diluted.
Yes.
So Maximilian was against it. Not that sure what it had to do with him, but he was very much against it. Because he was already miffed that he was the only one still upholding the intentions of the League of Cambrai to annihilate Venice.
Yep.
He wrote to Margaret of Austria with a furious diatribe about Bainbridge and his Venetian connections, although it turned out later he was muddling him up with Thomas Cranmer. I wondered how many of those letters that Margaret of Austria got where she thought, oh, Dad.
Yes.
Bless you. Got it wrong again.
Oh, wow.
Bainbridge didn't go with Julius to the siege of Mirandola, but went to the considerably more cosy billet of Ravenna, where he was made a cardinal. Paris de Gracis was annoyed, I don't know if it's Paris de Gracis or Paris de Gracie, but I'm going with Paris de Gracis, was annoyed since one of the other cardinals was older than Bainbridge, and so Bainbridge ought to have ceded his place to him.
What?
Like giving up your seat in a bus.
There's a seniority thing, and
apparently so. He
wonder-
said, yeah, it's protocol, damn it.
Oh.
But the Pope was adamant.
And
see, he can't control his Pope any more than Bertram could control his.
No, and what was his Julius's rationale to making him a cardinal?
He needed Henry VIII.
That's it. Not I was going to wait until there were only 24, but really, he didn't put any gloss on that, saying we actually need at least 25 or...
Well, there sort of were only 24, as we'll see in a minute.
Oh.
Not strictly, but there sort of were.
Okay.
So, soon after, the Pope lost Bologna to the French, and Louis was busy making his grand anti-Julius synod. So the Pope was more anti-French than ever, and was even more keen to lure Henry to his side. So he sent Henry several barrels of wine and 100 Parmesan cheeses.
That's a lot of cheese. Parmesan cheese wheels are huge.
Ah,
They're massive.
that's quite a consignment. That'll be a lot of cargo space in a ship.
Yes.
Well, the combined effort of the Pope, Venice, Bainbridge, Ferdinand of Aragon, and the 100 Parmesan cheeses soon reeled Henry in. And when Henry's inclusion into the League was to be signed, Bainbridge didn't yet have the authority to sign for Henry. But the fact that Bainbridge could say, consider it signed and I'll do it when I can, shows that he was trusted and respected by the Pope, even if he had shouted at him and called him a liar. It's very up and down with Julius.
Yeah.
He's one of these people who explodes with fury.
But then comes back to being calm and fine.
Yeah, calls you in later and says, yeah, ignore me. You know what I'm like.
Did he actually apologize or just assume everybody would know? Pretend it never happened.
He did apologise to his servants, because sometimes he'd get cross with them and chase them out of the room with a stick. And then he did apologise to them.
Oh, okay.
What was worrying Bainbridge was that with this league came a pact with Spain, and he was heard to say that he feared Spain even more than the French for its perfidy. And we know how much he detested the French, so
Yeah.
maybe he was just extremely racist.
Yes. If you're not English, you suck.
Or Venetian, he was all right with them.
Oh, okay. Well, really, they're more English than any other Italian state. His thought, not mine.
So Bainbridge had secured all three of the tasks that Henry had set him. He'd reconciled the Pope with Venice, he'd got his red hat, and he'd got Henry into the League under favourable terms. Number 4 on the list was a very tall order, but if he could pull it off, he would be in Henry's good books forever. It was to get all Louis's rights, including the title of Most Christian King, transferred by papal authority to Henry VIII.
Oh.
Followed by Henry's coronation in France.
Oh.
Effectively, Henry would be given France, or at least the parts of it that England laid claim to. Ooh. All this was dependent on Henry going to war against France and defeating Louis. But you'd think if he managed that, he'd get them all anyway, wouldn't he? He'd won.
The Pope.
But this had the Pope's backing up front.
Ah.
If you can have backing up front. What a terrible way of putting
it. Endorsement.
Yes. Henry wrote to Bainbridge to say, "Fear not, the English fleet with 6,000 men was already heading off to help Ferdinand retake Gascony and Guienne." And a later letter from Henry complained that the French were luring Maximilian away, but the Pope shouldn't worry, since he, Henry, was on hand to liberate the church. You know what he's like. However, news then came that the joint invasion by the French and Spanish had fallen apart. Bainbridge reaction? I told you couldn't trust the Spanish. And he was right, but he wouldn't have known why he was right, since he won't have listened to the 3rd episode we did about Ferdinand of Aragon.
Yes.
We know that Ferdinand was stringing Henry along, using him as a stooge, while Ferdinand, got on with the more important job of securing northern Italy for his grandson. But Bainbridge was still right, he just didn't know why he was right. The Pope announced that he was entering into an alliance with Maximilian, excluding Venice, since Maxi wouldn't join anything that had the Venetians in it. And Julius wanted Maximilian for the Lateran Council that he'd set up. But all Bainbridge saw was the Venetians being pushed inexorably into the arms of the French.
Yes.
Bainbridge got to conduct the inaugural Mass for the Lateran Council, but inevitably he annoyed Paris de Gracis by saying special prayers for Henry, which apparently provoked laughter.
Oh.
Yeah, you can't have laughter during Mass.
No.
Paris de Gracis was not pleased about it.
No.
And then Pope Julius died.
Oops. All that work out the window.
Yes. The conclave, which elected Leo X, 1513, was the first to contain an English cardinal since 1370.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah. But whom was Bainbridge to vote for? His main criteria was that the new pope should change foreign policy, particularly regarding war, as little as possible. Bainbridge had just got it set up nicely for Henry to receive his French titles, so he didn't want some new broom sweeping out everything he was trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Wolsey was all for Castellesi becoming pope, since he was considered English in all but name.
And Wolsey's not a cardinal yet.
No,
Okay.
1515 he becomes cardinal, so we've got another 2 years for him.
Yeah.
Bainbridge favoured Raffaele Riario.
A Riario? Really?
Yes, he was Caterina Sforza's nephew, I think. Well, nephew by marriage. One of the guardians of the conclave was Silvestro Gigli,
Oh.
who had returned to Rome as Henry's representative at the Lateran Council, and more of him later. But Bainbridge, or at least one of his English party, since he was allowed to take his nephew, Roger Bainbridge, and his secretary, Richard Pacin, with him to the conclave.
Yeah, they were allowed to take servants.
Well, those were his two servants. One of them got caught cheating.
Oh. They were all cheating. You just don't get caught.
Well, they got caught. Nothing that was going on in the conclave was allowed to get to the outside world.
Correct.
And yet, on the bottom of a silver plate used by the English team were the words, quote, St. George, meaning Riario, or Medici, unquote. And this was meant to go to Gigli so he'd know the state of play.
Ooh.
And he's not meant to.
Ooh. What happens when that happened? Does that cardinal get bounced out of the conclave?
He didn't. No, he was still there.
Oh.
Just a slap on the wrist, I think.
Oh.
In the first round, Bainbridge voted for a layman, Fabrizio del Carretto. Medici got 1 vote, and Riario got none.
How does a layman end up at this time?
Leo X is a layman. He had to be
Is he?
made a priest just before he was made pope.
How does that happen?
I don't know. Yeah, I came
thought
across
you
that
already had to be
earlier.
a cardinal. When does that happen?
He was a cardinal. He wasn't a priest.
What?
I know. I found that baffling. I think it involves having contact.
I'm going to have to listen to Pontifex on Leo X.
I mean, they might say I've got this completely wrong, but I did read that Leo X was a layman, so and it's not unknown.
That is mind-boggling.
Editing Lucy here. I checked up on Leo, and I was gratified to find I hadn't dreamt it. I was right. He wasn't a priest when he became pope. He was ordained priest on the 15th of March 1513. He was consecrated as bishop on the 17th of March, and he was crowned pope on the 19th of March. And he was the last lay person to be elected pope. Medici got 1 vote, and Riario got none. And no one's sure why Bainbridge voted this way, except that he may have heard through the grapevine that Riario hadn't got a chance, and maybe he wanted to make sure that Bainbridge, wasn't involved in any factionalism.
Right.
So just step out of this round and see how the land lies.
Yeah.
Just vote for someone who hasn't got a hope in hell and buy yourself a bit of time.
And if it was supposed to be anonymous, how do we know?
Yes. Well, Bainbridge received 2 votes, one from Castellesi and one from Canaro, so we do know.
Oh.
Presumably Castellesi was trying to bolster the English presence, and Canaro's vote was to say thank you very much for doing your best for Venice.
I wonder if it wasn't anonymous yet.
I wonder if it was anonymous at the time and then not afterwards. You know, you go out and say, well, who did you vote for? Is that another episode then? The papal conclave. Before the next round, Medici and Riario had a long, secret conversation. We know what these secret conversations are like.
Yes.
Presumably, Medici was offering Riario stuff to tell his people to switch their allegiance. And the long and the short of it was that it worked, and Medici won and became Pope Leo X. What Bainbridge feared, and what he was right to fear, was that Leo's allegiance would be first Florence, then the papacy. Because he had been pushed into it by the Medici family, saying, come on, you've got to represent us, we need a pope. So it was a bit difficult for him,
Yeah.
I think. Especially as Florence was siding with France, and that didn't bode well. And as Bainbridge had suspected, Leo's first actions were to take the pressure off Ferrara and to consider pardoning the cardinals who had joined Louis's Grand Synod.
Ah.
That's not good.
No.
Because they're the ones who were trying to oust Julius.
Yes.
And say, give him a vote of no confidence. I mean, Leo may have had no confidence in Julius, but, popes should probably stick together.
Yeah.
Then Leo said, quote, considering that he is bound by chapters and a solemn oath to procure pax general among all Christian princes, he cannot openly invade the French king, unquote. Peace amongst all Christian princes was not what Henry had sent Bainbridge to do. So I don't know if this word openly, when I first read it, I thought, hang on, he can't openly invade. What is he doing though? But I couldn't find anything surreptitious either. So it didn't seem to mean anything, unfortunately. I thought, right, openly. But no. Bainbridge was passionately opposed to Leo for forgiving the rogue cardinals, possibly for reasons that were rather more personal than you might suspect. If you remember, Julius had promised not to make any more cardinals until the number fell to 24.
Yes.
And Bainbridge had become cardinal because the rogue cardinals had been deprived of their titles, and that's what brought the numbers down.
Ah, okay.
But what would happen if they were welcomed back into the fold?
Ooh, now you've got a lot more cardinals.
Would it be last in, first out? Not only that, but he had received some of the benefices that had previously belonged to the other cardinals.
Oh dear.
Would he have to give them back?
Yes, I would think so.
Bainbridge protested by not turning up to the cardinal's reinstatement. And he sent Henry a very annoyed letter, telling him that Castellesi was claiming that he'd boycotted it too, and it wasn't true. He'd been there.
Wow.
In fact, he mentions Castellesi in several of his letters. Never complimentary. He suspected of him having secret links with the French. Quote, the said Adrian, Castellesi, is as partial a Frenchman as I am an Englishman, unquote. So, criticising Castellesi while saying to Henry, but don't worry, you're safe with me. In another letter, he says, quote, I be very loath to write anything against any person unto your grace. Yet I cannot of duty hold my peace, unquote.
Ah.
And then he goes on to list Castellesi's shortcomings. Henry suddenly became really bellicose, largely because his father-in-law had told him to. And he made an alliance with Maximilian to take on the French. And then in the summer of 1513, news arrived that Henry VIII had actually invaded France. And now Bainbridge could go to the Pope and say, look, we upheld our side of the bargain. The least you could do is to support the anti-French League and send a joint army across the Alps to get Louis.
Get him.
But the Pope wasn't keen. And Leo said, why don't we just hang on and see how the Venetian campaign goes, and then we can decide what to do about the French then.
Okay.
And Bainbridge was justifiably frustrated. As far as he was concerned, the Venetian campaign could go on indefinitely, and the Pope was just hiding behind this fact to do nothing, since he came from Florence, and Florence sided with the French. Meanwhile, Henry had gone into France in good faith, expecting the rest of the League to come tearing over the Alps to help him.
He was so gullible.
He was. But then again, presumably Bainbridge was telling him, don't worry, I'll talk the Pope round.
Yeah.
Maybe. But anyway, they weren't going to be there. Whatever he'd been told, they're not coming. And then news reached Rome that Henry had actually taken Terouenne.
Oh, right. We're there. Okay.
Yeah. And the reaction was,
So?
we don't believe it. We don't believe it.
No, we didn't.
He never has.
The man's inept.
No one had expected it. And that's probably why they felt safe not doing anything. But now Henry had called their bluff and actually won something. Even Bainbridge didn't believe it when he first heard.
He's your king. I don't care.
Yeah, but he's rubbish. A little prematurely, Bainbridge went to Pope Leo. OK, when would you be crowning Henry King of France then? Yeah, he's taken one city. One city. Does that make him King of France? I don't think it even makes him King of Terouenne, does it?
Nope.
Interestingly, Bainbridge received a letter from another cardinal, Vigerio, suggesting to Bainbridge that he get the papal brief handing over Louis's title to Henry sent off to him as soon as he could, without telling the Pope he was sending it. And it's thought that this was to avoid the possibility that Leo would ask for modifications to the brief, or ask for lots of money to let it pass.
Okay.
If Leo did try something like that, Bainbridge would just say, too late, it's gone. It does seem a risky business, tricking the Pope.
Very. Very, very.
And it seems that they might have got cold feet, since Vigerio then wrote to Henry to say that he would send in the brief just as soon as it had been ratified by the Pope. I don't know whether Bainbridge was horrified and said, I'm not doing anything of the sort.
Oh, I'm out.
Whether they just panicked. But either he or Bainbridge would have to bring it. And since Vigerio was laid up with rheumatic fever, Bainbridge it was then. I'm not sure why they had to bring it. Etiquette, protocol, don't know. But it had to be one of those two. He also added a PS. If Henry could see his way clear to giving him a benefice, that might make the wheels turn a little faster. They're not even subtle.
Pay me money and I will do it.
Meanwhile, Bainbridge was busy on another matter. James IV of Scotland had just invaded England. Bainbridge went straight to the Pope to say, remember how you said you'd excommunicate James if he's invaded? Well, he's gone and done it.
He's invaded. Yeah, it's time for you to do what you said you would.
Yeah. And Bainbridge wrote to Henry, he just couldn't resist having a little dig. For your Grace's party, there were few that spake. Only my Lord Surrant, I'm not sure who that is, and myself. My Lord the Cardinal Hadrian, that's Castellesi, kept silence, unquote. Yeah. When news came of the English victory at Flodden, Bainbridge and Castellesi lit bonfires in front of their palaces, as did the Spanish. Bainbridge was all for having a mass of celebration, but Paris de Gracis was shocked. Christian blood had been shed. And he said the Scottish king was not an enemy of the church. I thought he was by that point. The reason he couldn't be buried was because he had been excommunicated. That's why he was shoved in that cupboard for a window cleaner to find.
Oh my goodness.
So I think Paris de Gracis has got that wrong. But even so, I think he's right to say we don't celebrate
Evil
killing.
People. Yeah.
Next, what must have seemed like the culmination of a life's work. October 1513, and Bainbridge was ready to set off for England to give Henry VIII a brief bestowing on him the French king's titles. It was all looking so good. Henry and Margaret of Austria, on Maximilian's behalf, had arranged not only that they would all invade the French in the following spring, but that Henry's sister Mary should marry Maximilian's grandson Charles, later to be Charles V.
Right.
The arrangement was that Bainbridge would go to Germany, scoop up Maximilian, and then they'd both go on to Calais to celebrate the Mary-Charles wedding. Then Bainbridge would go on to England to celebrate the complete collapse of France.
The complete collapse.
And yet, in more ways than you would think, this did not come to pass.
Yeah.
Bainbridge didn't have the brief. He only had a copy, and he seemed to think this would be enough. And it turned out that Henry should request the original from the Pope. And I couldn't work out whether Bainbridge was misleading Henry, or Bainbridge himself was misled, or he just thought, They also do. It's, it's the same words. But I think it was the latter, since he was writing mystified letters asking what had happened.
What's going on?
Yeah, he suspected, quote, said orator, Silvestro Gigli, had, for his own purposes, prevented a letter from reaching him, unquote.
Dun, dun.
I couldn't quite work out whether Bainbridge was on his way and so would have to come back to Rome to pick up the original copy, or whether he was still in Rome. But it must have been utterly humiliating.
I couldn't...
He's got the Pope saying, what are you thinking of? You can't go with a copy. You've got Henry saying, what are you thinking of? You can't come with a copy. He's just messed the whole thing up. And this was the big thing. This was his moment of glory.
No.
In fact, Henry never did write to the Pope requesting the brief.
Oh.
And you think, well, why not? This should have been so important to him.
Yes.
Also, he seems to be very disappointed with Bainbridge.
Well, yeah, I would be too.
Bainbridge was meant to be going to him as a legate, but the king was, quote, disinclined to admit him as legate, unquote.
Oh, you did it bad.
Maximilian had apparently specifically requested that the legate should be Bainbridge. So he's obviously forgiven him about the whole Venice thing, or has explained to him that he got the wrong person. Bainbridge wrote to Maximilian asking him, would you tell Henry what you just said? Would you tell Henry that you want me? Because he doesn't seem to want me. And the Pope wrote to Henry saying, surely you prefer one of your own. Henry sent his chamberlain, Sir John Cheney, to Rome to tell Bainbridge not to come. And it seems that poor Bainbridge, halfway to achieving his triumph, has been thwarted. But by whom? The Pope? Henry? Castellesi?
All of
Silvestro
them.
Gigli?
None of them like you.
Wolsey? He seems to be absolutely just as baffled as we are, really.
I just think it's all of them. He's goofed.
He has, but Henry could have got in touch with the Pope and said, well, I'd be quite like to be King of France. Could I have the proper documentation, please?
Please give it to me.
He's hardly pulled the plug on it completely. I didn't understand why he didn't. And then the job for which Bainbridge had thought he was a shoo-in, since he'd been doing the work anyway, the English protectorship, had gone instead to, surprise, surprise, the Pope's cousin. And then to rub his face in the dirt even more, Bainbridge's whole enterprise came tumbling down. The Pope made a deal with France, then Ferdinand made a truce, then it got to Bainbridge that Maximilian and Henry were going to do so too. Bainbridge just wouldn't or couldn't believe it. He really thought this was a cunning plan on Henry's part. Yes, Ferdinand and Maximilian would make sneaky pacts with the enemy.
But Henry
That's just what you'd expect them to do. But not Henry.
Henry's
Not while Bainbridge was so close to giving him his French titles.
No.
And in fact, on this rare occasion, Bainbridge was right. But whether he'd known it or just a lucky guess, I'm not sure. I think it was just wishful thinking on his part. Henry and Maximilian were still planning the spring offensive. All the talk of peace was just a cunning plan. But the problem was that Rome was still backing out as far as their own participation was concerned. But Cardinal de' Medici wrote to Fox and Wolsey saying that the Pope thought it would be a glorious thing if Henry went to war without help from others, but that others would reap the benefit. The rest of them would make a truce with France for 15 months. How does that sound, he said?
Yeah. You do all the work. We get the benefit.
Yeah.
Yes.
Henry said, great, lovely.
Yeah, of course.
No. Again, poor Bainbridge was left thinking, what the hell is going on?
No kidding.
But then he began to put two and two together. Who had arranged this deal? In fact, who had been part of this whole thing every step of the way?
Ferdinand.
And who had prevented his letters getting through? Probably. No actual proof of that, but probably. Bainbridge wrote to Henry, quote, as touching my Lord of Worcester, your Grace's orator of late time, his secretary, upon the dark night, was met coming forth of the French king's orator's house, with a torchlight borne behind him, and where his way towards his master's house lay straight past my gates, he went another way home by secret back lane, a good space from thence, unquote. Lord of Worcester is Silvestro Gigli. Why was Gigli secretary?
With the
what
French.
What was Gigli's secretary doing at the French orator's house? And why did he sneak home in the dark by the back way?
Naughty, naughty.
Well, Henry, evidently not really favouring this idea of going to war without help of the others, and yet they reap the benefits, did make a treaty with France. Bainbridge felt he'd been hung out to dry, but he tried to hide his resentment, because you can't write to the king and say, "You swine."
No.
He wrote to Henry, "Remembering such poor service as my mind hath been to do unto your grace continually since my coming unto this country, for the best of my little power during my life, I shall ever be as diligent as any other, your true and faithful servant," unquote. So I think he's trying to make Henry feel bad now. Saying, "Look, I've done it all for you." So what was going on? Bainbridge was meant to be a diplomat, and yet he never seems to know what's happening. Nor only were his plans being scuppered in Rome, but his name was being dragged through the mud back in England. Well, there are two possible culprits. As we saw in Gigli's episode, he was one. But was there someone pulling his strings? And could it be that lovable man, played by Jonathan Pryce in Wolf Hall? Lovable old Uncle Wolsey. Much of the havoc that Bainbridge had attributed to Castellesi was in fact Gigli.
Oh.
So when he was writing back to Henry saying, Castellesi's done this, Castellesi's done that.
He was wrong.
No, Castellesi seems to have been, on his side, really.
Oh.
He just couldn't see it. Bainbridge and Gigli had started off okay. They'd worked in partnership since 1512, but Bainbridge had been warned about Gigli's character. And he wrote to Henry, quote, "It is of truth I brought him to Rome in Pope Julius's days, only at your grace's desire and commandment, which was in manner to my infinite labours and business. At which time, so God be my help, Pope Julie," and that is what he calls him,
Aww.
Pope Julie,
Maxie and Julie,
"showed me expressly that though for your grace's sake, and partly at my desire, he was content to suffer him to come to Rome as a private person, never to be in office there, nor authority, he should undoubtedly within a short space serve either your grace or me, or both, as untruly as he doth him," that's Pope Julie, "so long as I see him diligent in your said causes, perceiving in him no untruth or suspicion, I used him accordingly, and made of him like report unto your grace. But after that, not only by report of many men, but also that manifestly I did perceive the contrary, I never have solicited your causes with him, nor suffer him to subscribe my letters, nor, your grace not offended, I never intend to do so during my life," unquote. So Gigli's a wrong 'un, and everyone seems to have known he was a wrong 'un, including the Pope. He was saying, just don't have anything to do with him.
Except for the one person who really should have known.
But again, was this more personal than it sounds? All the letters complaining about Gigli come from after 1513, and this coincides with Bainbridge's annoyance that Gigli had told Wolsey that the Pope had decided to give Henry the bestest king cap and sword, and Gigli had said, "This was all down to me. This is all me, just me, nobody else." And in fact, Paris de Grassis attested that Gigli was nothing to do with it whatsoever, and it had all been Bainbridge, which must have infuriated Bainbridge. I feel like we're getting a bit of a De Ayala and De Puebla feel about this.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, Henry seems to like Gigli. He seems to be annoyed with Bainbridge.
Oh, I'd be so furious. I would be so furious.
Yeah. But even worse, and even beyond Bainbridge's suspicions, it was Gigli who had turned everyone against him in England and prevented him from becoming legate.
Really?
Fox and Wolsey wrote to Gigli, quote, It is our mind that our Holy Father in this cause shall use you as his servant and instrument there, and us as his like servants and instruments here, and ye always to write the secrecies of this matter and his pleasure to us, and we similarly to write the king's mind and pleasure therein to you. And by this means we trust this matter shall the sooner come to good effect, than if it were treated by great persons, which with their morose gravities, great pomp, ceremonies and solemnities, treat the time so long that in the mean season fall many accidents, oftentimes letting the good speed of all the purpose, unquote. So this is what Jiggly's been saying behind Bainbridge's back.
Basically, he's long-winded and everybody else gets in there before him.
Yeah.
Oh,
But
wow.
is it that it seems to be taking a long time with Bainbridge because Jiggly's not sending back the letters? Bainbridge suspected him of diverting some of his letters. And it makes it look as if he just hasn't bothered to reply.
Gosh, I'd be angry.
And why did Wolsey have such antipathy towards him? I just don't know. I don't know. We'll wait until Wolsey's episode and find out. Wolsey had blocked, as much as he was able, the possibility of Bainbridge becoming Pope in 1511. Although, surely, there'd have been some kudos in having an English Pope. Unless Wolsey was thinking, I want to be Pope.
Mm-hmm.
He'd actively campaigned against him being legate. And when Wolsey was chasing his own red hat, he did it through Castellesi, not through Bainbridge. Although, as we've heard, that backfired.
Yes.
Because Castellesi said, don't give it to him. He's a terrible man. But I wondered whether Castellesi was a better friend to Bainbridge than Bainbridge realised. Maybe he didn't think Wolsey deserved the red hat because of how he'd treated Bainbridge. Maybe. We'll wait and find out from Wolsey's episode. Bainbridge was on friendly terms with Venice, Maximilian, Margaret of Austria, the Swiss, Massimiliano Sforza, and the Gonzagas of Mantua. Francesco Gonzaga said he looked upon Bainbridge as a father. But he seems to get on with every other court except England. For reasons he couldn't fathom. But I think, if we think that it's Silvestro Jiggly, then maybe we can fathom it. We might not necessarily like Bainbridge's attitude, since he was all for war, even when everybody was for peace. But I think that was because he was so fiercely loyal to England and wanted Henry to outshine the other rulers. As he'd seen it, France had sided with the excommunicant James IV of Scotland. It had gone to war with Julius, and it had tried to create a synod to oust the Pope. Just for that, they deserved to be overrun by the rest of the League. And he wasn't a Machiavelli. He didn't think it was right to break a treaty just because it was expedient to do so. He sided with Venice, even to the point of risking the Pope's wrath to get the interdict lifted. And that was due to England's policy of alliance with Venice for trade reasons. So everything he did for England.
Yeah. He just didn't politic well enough.
I don't think he did. Or he had a very dangerous enemy, as we will find out. Bainbridge died on the night of 14th July 1514. However, the funeral wasn't held to the 31st, which was quite a delay.
Yeah.
The problem was that many people thought that he had been poisoned.
Well, everybody thinks everybody's poisoned at this time, though.
Yeah, but possibly with a bit more evidence in this one. Cardinal Riario made a statement before the Pope that the matter would be investigated, so they had to postpone the burial until the post-mortem could be carried out. So what did they find out? The findings of the autopsy were unsatisfactory. Paris de Grassis said that the right side of Bainbridge's heart looked abnormal, but this sounds more like a heart or lung condition, not poisoning. And in 1511, Bainbridge had been ill with malaria, so we know malaria returns, so maybe he died of malaria. Baldassare Castiglione, who we'll talk about in another episode, said the rumour of poison was just to cover up medical mismanagement.
Oh. I wonder if
And as you say, we're in the 15th century Italy. Poison was always suspected.
Yeah.
However, a certain priest, Reynald de Modena, actually confessed that he'd put poison in Bainbridge's soup on Corpus Christi Day. That's 15th of June.
Ah, was he under torture when he said this?
We'll come to that. We'll come to that. But as I said, he died on the 14th of July. Corpus Christi Day, 15th of June. That's a very slow-acting poison.
Yeah.
Bainbridge went out for dinner that night with Cardinal de Corretto on the night of Corpus Christi. As was not the actions of a dying man. He'd had what he called colic that day, but he'd had what was known as a clyster, and he was well enough to go out.
What
and a
is
clyster was
that?
the old word for an enema.
Oh. Ew.
And that was a treatment for poisoning, but it was also a treatment for lots of other things. Why was Reynald de Modena suspected? We have this commentary from William Burbank, Bainbridge's secretary. He had at least two secretaries, Richard Pace and Burbank. Quote, "And by cause that it was known almost manifestly that the Bishop of Worcester," that's Jigley, "was enemy unto my lord, it was suddenly noised through the city that he should have been the author of this great pretended offence. A certain priest, Reynald de Modena, was much in my lord's chamber, and always dear and familiar with the said Bishop of Worcester. Upon suspicion he was taken by the Pope's commandment and set in Castel St. Angelo, unquote. Burbank then says that he was one of the group of people comprising the auditor of the chamber, the castellan, two bishops, the fiscal, and sundry notaries, who were present for the 3 days that Reynald was held. Reynald confessed to passing Bainbridge's secrets to Jigley, and several other things, quote, whereby the judges after thought him worthy to suffer torture, unquote. However, Burbank goes on to say later, quote, whereupon, supposing no confession to have been made by the same Reynald, I took my leave, unquote. But Richard Pace, another of Bainbridge's secretaries, later told Burbank that Reynald had confessed freely and without torture. So maybe Burbank left just before the torture started, which would be understandable. That's when I'd leave.
Yeah.
And just the threat of it made Reynald confess. And this is what Reynald said in his confession, quote, the said bishop, that's Jigley, gave him for his labour. I feel bad now for giving him such a silly name, because he's obviously a really bad person.
Yeah, he is not a good guy.
No, but he's still Jigley. Gave him for his labours in this behalf 15 ducats of gold and some decamera. I'm not sure what that means. Item, that the said bishop said these words unto him, if we rid not this cardinal of the world, we shall never be in quietness. Item, he confessed that one Stephen, secret chamberlain unto the said Bishop of Worcester, was privy hereunto. He saith he did buy the said poison in a city named Spoleto, not very far from Rome, and kept it a good space in his chamber under a tile stone. And sith the said Reynald hath written in his confession in his own hand, and hath confessed the same unto my Lord Cardinal de Medici, your Grace's protector, whom the Pope's Holiness, after he was informed by the said judges thereof, sent purposely to know the very truth. The said Reynald hath also confirmed it with a great oath. He made this confession freely to the intent that it should be shown immediately unto the Pope's Holiness, supposing thereby that the said Holiness should have granted him his life, and desired the same of my said Lord de Medici, who answered that he should have pardon for all things he confessed, which was theft and many other enormities, save only for the killing of my Lord Cardinal. Upon the morrow after, the said Reynald, with a small knife he had a secret, smote himself, woefully intending to have killed himself, and thereof is in point of death, unquote. So this sounds to me, he wasn't actually tortured, those plea bargaining went on, and he didn't discover until too late that the murder of Bainbridge wouldn't be part of the plea bargaining.
Which is, of course, death sentence.
Yeah. So he decided to forego the death sentence and, do it himself.
Yeah, stop. Yep.
This put Jigley in a rather awkward position. He wrote to Fox and Wolsey that Reynald had retracted his confession, all but that bit where he'd said he'd done it, just him, only him, nobody else. Mm-hmm. and confessed that he only incriminated Jiggly to deflect the blame off himself. Burbank remembered it slightly differently. Yes, Reynold had recanted, but only after being badgered by Jiggly, and all that time he was cursing that he'd ever had anything to do with him. When Jiggly was later asked what motive Reynold could have for acting without Jiggly's instigation, Jiggly claimed that Reynold had stolen 200 ducats worth of goods from Bainbridge, and anyway he was mad. Jiggly had employed him in England, discovered how mad he was, and dismissed him. And if that's true, it would give Reynold a motive to incriminate him. But Burbank said that's not true. He had seen Jiggly and Reynold together long after Jiggly had allegedly got rid of him. According to Richard Pace, the judges had recommended that Jiggly, quote, not only be put in prison, but also suffer torments and be compelled to show the truth, unquote.
So torture him.
Torture him, but Jiggly was an English ambassador. He had diplomatic immunity.
Ah, right.
I'm not sure when diplomatic immunity came in, but yeah, very handy for Jiggly. Pope Leo didn't follow up the charges, and neither did Wolsey.
Oh.
Was there a reason why Wolsey didn't want the case investigated? Was he behind Jiggly?
Yeah, he was.
Burbank wrote that there had been, quote, rumour how that the poison should have been sent from England, and by some prelate there being enemy unto my said lord, and procured the same to be ministered unto him by his cook, unquote. But both Pace and Burbank were quick to rebuke these rumours, since they said Bainbridge had no enemies in England. But he did, or they'd have let him become legate.
Yes.
There's no concrete evidence against Wolsey. He did sequester Bainbridge's money to pay for what he called the dilapidations in York Minster, while Bainbridge had been Archbishop there. And this meant, though, that Pace no longer had the money he was going to use to prosecute the case. So you could see this as an underhanded way to make sure Pace's case was never heard.
Right. Gosh, this is convoluted.
Isn't it? Wolsey was going to take Bainbridge's vestments and tapestries, but for some reason they found their way into Jiggly's household.
Oh, some reason.
Wolsey wrote to Jiggly, quote, glad I am of your honourable acquittal in the slander of great malaise laid to your charge, as though the same had touched me. And with like ardent mind shall I persecute those that thus malaisely hath accused you, as though they had sembly laid the thing to my charge, unquote. As well he might, since they pretty much have.
Yes.
But I guess we'll never know what happened and who was to blame. After Bainbridge's death, his secretary, Richard Pace, wrote to Henry, I do take God to my judge, that he was the most faithful man to your grace, his prince, that ever was born, and most vehement in the defence of your grace's causes, when none other man durst open his mouth to speak, save him alone, unquote. So if Wolsey had convinced Henry that Bainbridge wasn't loyal, that's a pity, since a more loyal servant upholding the status of England in Rome, it'd probably been hard for Henry to have found.
Yeah. Aww.
So that is the story of Christopher Bainbridge.
A little inept.
Unless I misread the whole thing, it seems to be rather put upon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I feel bad for him.
If you've got a diplomat, tell them stuff.
Yes. Yeah, you kind of need to if you want him to do anything for you.
You really do. Yeah. But I don't know why Henry didn't ask for the brief to get the French titles. We'll find out next season, maybe.
Yeah. Weird.
I don't know. Yeah.
All round, like, nobody trusted anybody, and the person who should have been they trusted Jiggly. Or did they? I got confused when you said everybody knew he was a baddie.
Everyone in Rome seemed to know he was a baddie.
Okay. Not England.
I'm not sure everyone in England did. But I mean, if the Pope knew, then I should imagine everybody knew.
Yeah. So then why did they keep him? So confused.
But he was the English representative at the Lateran Council. Yeah, I mean, you'd think the Pope would have written to Henry saying, please take him away.
Yeah.
Do something with him.
He's difficult. We don't like him.
maybe Bainbridge was doing precisely that, and that's why Jiggly had said to Reynald, we need to silence him. We need to get rid of him. He's going to ruin our lives.
Mm-hmm.
It's all very mafia-esque, isn't it?
Yeah.
As it so often is. Especially with his Italian episodes.
In a way, I'm kind of glad we don't understand, because then we're not those people. If we did understand, it might look so good.
Yes. Well, at the end of Jiggly's episode, we said that we thought he might have murdered Christopher Bainbridge. And we've done Bainbridge now, and we still don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I feel he did. I think he was behind Reynald every step of the way. Whether Wolsey was behind him, not quite so sure.
Yeah.
Looking forward to doing Wolsey.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for listening
to this very short episode. We didn't promise it was
no,
short.
we didn't.
Did we?
We did not. This is a full episode. Goodbye.
Goodbye.